Today is May 15th, 2022. My name is Nita Kua Barrett Orsak, and I'm interviewing Doris Williams for the Commemoration and Contextualization Initiative. We're on the University of Texas at Austin campus in the Moody College of Communication Studios. Thank you, Miss Doris, for agreeing to this interview. So this interview is being recorded and the unedited copy will be housed here at UT Austin. Please know that if there are any topics that you do not want to discuss, I will honor your wishes. And also, if there are topics that you'd like to discuss and we haven't talked about, let's talk about them, bring it up before we end the interview. Okay. And lastly, if we need to take a break or go to the restroom, get a drink of water, just please let us know and we'll pause.
Okay,
so we will get started. And let's start with growing up in Bastrop and Lubbock.
Okay.
What were race relations like in your community and in your city when you were in school?
Well, thanks for having me. And the first thing that I want to do is clarify that I did not grow up in Bastrop, but I was born in Bastrop, and I will share traveling back and forth from Lubbock, Texas, and West Texas, which is where I was raised, to Bastrop. Normally it was during the summers, and I can share what it was like in Bastrop at that time. And since I didn't grow up there, but was only born there, I can say that it wasn't really pleasant in Bastrop. For the time that I visited back and forth. It was during Jim Crow, and we would travel from, and also it was all across the nation, the Jim Crow. So when we left Lubbock, we lived in Jim Crow, and when we traveled back to my birthplace in Bastrop, we also were in Jim Crow. One of the reasons why I ended up being raised in Lubbock in West Texas is to get away from, well, I guess you couldn't say get away from Jim Crow, but things were a lot, my relatives considered better than in Bastrop. So they migrated, my grandmother and my grandfather, who raised me in West Texas and Lubbock, felt that the conditions were a little better in West Texas than in Bastrop. But it wasn't pleasant in either places. Wasn't pleasant because everything was segregated. When we would come during the summers to Bastrop, we had to basically, I guess you could call it, stay in your place for African Americans because we're talking about the 50s. In the 50s. And so when we would come to Bastrop to visit my mother, my biological mother, we would go downtown Bastrop, and we would have to go in certain places that were open for African Americans in Bastrop. For example, the movie theaters were segregated. So now consider that we're just young kids during that time, and we would go to the movies, and we would have to sit upstairs because the movies were segregated in Bastrop. So we had to sit upstairs, and all the African Americans had to sit upstairs, and the Anglos sat downstairs. There were certain stores that we could not go in downtown Bastrop. We would have to stand outside, and maybe one person could go in and order an ice cream cone and get it for us. But that's the way it was during that era. But my grandmother and grandfather, who she was my maternal grandmother, my mother's mother, and her husband, they felt that West Texas wasn't quite as bad as it was in Central Texas. So I grew up there, went to high school in Lubbock. We lived in the country when we first arrived there, my grandparents. And my grandfather, who was my step-grandfather, was a sharecropper. So we lived in the country, and my grandfather worked the farm for the farmer. He only had he could not read or write. My grandfather. This is my step grandfather. He could not read or write. My grandmother had an 8th grade education. So he would bring in the crops for the person he worked for, and that was what my youth was like. So we did that for a while until I was a teenager, and then when I became a teenager, we moved from the little community of New Deal, Texas. It was called, and that's kind of significant, New Deal, because it really had something to do with that era. I don't know if it was President Roosevelt's New Deal, but the town was named New Deal, Texas. And it was nothing but maybe a crossroads where there was a store, and then they had the black segregated elementary school where I went, and my sister and I went. But eventually, my grandfather, the farm life was so hard, and we ended up moving to Lubbock, to the town of Lubbock. And we bought a home there, and I spent my high school teenage years in Lubbock and graduated from Paul Lawrence Dunbar High School in 1964. And so, typical of teenagers, I wanted to leave home. I wanted to get away from the strictness of my grandparents. But I knew I had to go to college because it was instilled in me and my sister and my mother. You know, the better life was go as far as you can and become educated. So it wasn't an option for me. I went to high school. I thank to their strictness didn't get pregnant. So I was able to complete high school. And then I said, my choice is Texas Tech. Texas Tech. Now, we're talking about the 60s, 1964. And in 1964, President Johnson passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which outlawed discrimination across the nation. And, some places allowed African Americans. They were more, I guess, open, liberal to African Americans, but the South was solid. The South had to be forced. So I said, okay, I could go to Texas Tech, or my mother, who lived her whole life in Bastrop, where I was born with her husband, her second husband. She had married my father, and that marriage didn't work out, and that's why my sister and I ended up going with her mother and her stepfather to West Texas. So I said, I want to leave Lubbock. I don't want to go to Tech because I'm going to be right here where, they're very, very, very strict on us. And so I said, I'll go to UT. Now, I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea what I was in for because I'm 18 years old. So I came here in 1964. I was in the top 10% of my all-black segregated Dunbar High School. I was smart, I thought, until I got to UT and came in, and it was nothing positive about UT at that time. University of Texas was forced to integrate, and so they had to let us in, but they did not have to make it easy for us. So I may stop here and let you ask me some more questions if there's something else you need to know about.
Yes, Ms. Doris, thank you. That was just very interesting. I love talking to you. So prior to UT, what were your schools like? So in New Deal
Yeah.
and then in Lubbock.
Oh,
What were
my.
those schools like?
Oh my goodness! And New Deal, which was would have been when I was, gosh, not even a teenager yet, in first grade up through, I think we moved to Lubbock when I was in the eighth grade. But it was a happy time for because we did not know we were protected, my sister and I, by our grandparents. We did not. They knew where we could go and where we shouldn't go. So we didn't do too much other than spend a lot of time either I want to say in the fields, helping them. They were sharecroppers, but my sister and I we couldn't pick cotton or pull cotton because we were so small, but we were exposed to it, chopping cotton and picking cotton, helping with them there in New Deal, Texas. And it wasn't pleasant. That wasn't pleasant for us. We didn't enjoy it. We wanted to be in the city. And we ended up actually moving to Lubbock because the work played out for my grandfather in the fields. So then we went to Lubbock. And when we moved to Lubbock, now that was a fun time because we didn't know we were actually, I guess, being discriminated against. We were in an all-black school. And it was interesting because the city of Lubbock, back during that time, as opposed to integrating us African Americans into their society, into their schools, they built a brand new state-of-the-art all-black school. To say we don't want them in our schools, in my mind, this is my opinion, but I'm thinking because those were the times. And so they built us a state-of-the-art. It was such a beautiful school. I have such favorable memories of Dunbar and just had a wonderful time in Dunbar High School.
That's great to hear. So before you came to UT Austin, what had you heard about it?
Oh my goodness, my mother, she was just, it was just, she wanted her, I'm the oldest, first sibling. It was just such a, maybe I reflect on that now and I just try to put myself in her place to say, she was proud to say, I want my daughter to go to the University of Texas because we couldn't, it was like the shining city on the hill, the university. It meant so much to her. And so she did not know, what I would have to go through with, but she wanted to be able to, I guess I consider it bragging rights to say, my daughter's at the University of Texas and I have a daughter going to the University of Texas. And so, but that was her dream. And it was mine too, because I knew I had to go to college and I knew that I didn't want to go to Texas Tech. So I was fine with going to UT. And, but it was difficult. It was very difficult because I didn't grow up in Bastrop and I had to live with my mother, and my mother had remarried and she started her family, a second family, and it was a lot of us in a very small house with her husband, and it was very difficult to study, and it was very difficult to get up to UT because Bastrop is about 30 miles from Austin. So I would have to get up real early in her home with all of my siblings. Couldn't study because there was a lot of noise and stuff going on. And I would have to catch a ride with the workers most of them were domestics, like maids and low-paying jobs. They workers, very good people, but they had to travel to Austin because there was nothing for them in Bastrop. It was segregated, so there was always a carpool. My step-grandfather, he worked at a service station in Austin, and so he would pick up people in Bastrop, and I would go along because I was at UT. I had been admitted to UT. So I would ride up to Austin, and he would drop me off on Guadalupe. And then I would have to wait for if I had an 8 o'clock class, and he would usually get the workers up here around maybe 7:30 because they had to be at work at 8. So then I would be dropped off on campus with just no place to go, would just hang out until I had a class. And normally I had a cousin who lived in one of the dorms on campus, segregated dorm. And sometimes I would stay there until my class. And sometimes I would go over to the student union at UT. It was called the Black Student Union at that time. And I would hang out there until my classes. And I remember, I guess I've always been kind of a radical. It was during the Vietnam era at UT in 64. I came in 64. You know, the war was going on in Vietnam. And so I just remember going on campus we would call them soap. They would have a little box out maybe on the mall, and people would be long-haired and hippies, and they were protesting the war. And so I would be in that group of people, listening on my way between classes. I remembered that at UT, but and that was also the time when Whitman guy, Walt Whitman, I think his name was. He was like the first sniper back in the day. He went up on that tower, 27 stories, and he shot and killed a bunch of people. I was on the campus, but I was not. I was at UT during that time, but I was not on campus because the summer I had gone back to Lubbock, and I guess that was a good thing because I wasn't even around. But, I had run into a lot of, the professors weren't welcoming. They didn't, we were just, it was, I guess most of the people that are precursors like me, we can relate to how it was for us. I guess I want to share one other thing about that experience, and that is that, I was in swimming. We had PT as part of my curriculum, my 2 semesters at UT in the beginning. And, it's so many years ago, you try to go back and you try to remember things that stand out, particularly about that experience, which wasn't very good. And two of them that stand out in my mind was they had something like a Sadie Hawkins dance or something at UT back in the day. And even though UT let us on, we still weren't integrated, as far as UT was concerned. So I remember that we were 18. I was 18, and you had to, if you wanted to go to the dance, the ritual was the guys would put a cap on a tree or on a fountain up someplace up high, and the girl who may have had a crush on the guy on campus, if she got that hat, he had to take her to the dance. So of course, as African Americans, we just stood and we just stood by and watched all the other kids run up and get caps, but it wasn't anything that we could participate in. And I felt so sad about that. It was a sad time to say, well, why can't we participate, And then another thing that I recall about that time was we had, it was just, you weren't a person, you were just a number. I remember in my biology class, someone said to me in 1964 that 65, because the first time I was only at UT from 64 to 74. So the first 64, that was a real unfavorable time because the university did not want us here. I was in that swimming class, and of course I had to swim, and we had we didn't have any anything for our hair, African Americans' hair. We couldn't blow, there were no blow dryers, so you just got out the pool and your hair was just looking terrible and you had to go to class. You couldn't blow it dry. You couldn't blow your hair dry. So that was something that resonated with me, that, oh gosh, it was just awful that I would have to try to figure out how to take care of my hair, because back then black was not beautiful back then. And so that was a negative experience. But that was one of the things that probably may have been to my advantage, because after I think I maybe failed, got a D or something, and I had to repeat that swimming class over again. And I was like, oh no, I got to take it over. And then I was so distraught about having to do that, because back then I wasn't wearing my hair natural like now. And so they just said, well, send her back to Lubbock, and so she can just maybe take some time off, because, she's just wrought over this swimming thing. And that's why I wasn't on campus, which was a good thing back then. It may have saved my life, because he was just up there shooting people and all over for as far as he could, But I was at UT during that time.
So there were things that you could not participate in.
Yes.
What type, were there other activities that you and the others and your peers would do, socialize in Austin?
Well, let me say this now, that I want to say that we were told that at the time that I was at UT the first time in 64, because I was here from 64 to 65, at the end of 65, we were told there were 400 African Americans on campus. Now, during that time, UT was reported to have incoming fresh, to have a student body of about 70,000 people back then. It was considered the biggest college, one of the biggest colleges in the Southwest. It was also considered the whitest college in the Southwest. That was another name they had for it. But I never saw 400 black people on the campus. I was isolated, always isolated. I was like number 400 and some odd in my biology class. I didn't not even have a name, because there was so many students in the freshman class that you were just given a number. So you just said present, and you just hollered present if you were there, or just a number. That's how. So we were so isolated, all of us. There were certainly, I don't recall 400 of us, but I do know that we all gravitated to, during that time, the Black Student Union. And that's where a little bit of reprieve, because we could see each other, and we could talk to each other. And I remember so many of our African Americans stayed there and played cards. and we kind of joke about that. They didn't get out, because they were distracted by just to be there with each other, and didn't do the work. And some of us would go in and would want to, but then, I was struggling, trying to maintain. And so to answer your question, no, we didn't. Maybe some of the people that lived in dorms, like Alametris and Whitus, they may have a different story than mine. But mine was no. I got picked up. I had to meet the carpool going back to Bastrop. I had to walk all the way from the University of Texas all the way down on 6th Street in Austin, because that's where my stepdad picked us all up, all the workers and me, and drove us back to Bastrop.
Ms. Doris, when you returned to Lubbock,
Mm-hmm.
what was that like when you went back after such a tough year at UT?
Yeah. Well, and this probably happened, you'll hear a lot of us precursors say that, we just went on with our lives. We just decided to go on with our lives. Like, I went back, I actually ended up starting dating someone in Lubbock who was an airman. We had Reese Air Force Base. And, I'm only 18, 19, so I got married. I actually got married. And when I say went on with my life, and my husband and kid's father, I went to Philadelphia with him, because we were stationed there. and just went on with my life. And I remember that, so that if you fill in the blanks in my life, I actually, uh, when my son was born in England, we were stationed overseas. We traveled, the Air Force took us all over. And my son was born there. But that marriage actually did not work out. But I came back to Texas. And that's when I was determined to say, I was 18. We didn't know what to expect. We were really up against a lot here. But I was older, and I thought I was prepared. I was really prepared. And so I enrolled again because I had taken, while I was in England, I had taken some classes through the University of Maryland, which they offered correspondence courses over in England. I took those courses. So when I came back to the United States, I actually re-enrolled at the University of Texas, and I brought in those transferable court credits to the University of Texas in 1970, and I stayed from 1970 all the way through to 1974, and the University of Texas had to award me a Bachelor's of Arts in History.
What was it like in 1970?
Oh, 1970. Okay, 1970, things were not all that much better, but I felt that I was prepared. I was better in terms of how to deal with it. Because, as you know, that we were considered now precursors. So the whole thing was, there's a date range for precursors matriculating here at UT. So in 1970, we still did not have a lot of African Americans, on campus. But and I'm sure my other precursors can corroborate what I'm saying, that I was focused on studying. I was focused on not letting, I was aware, of how difficult it was, and people weren't going to help you. You had to know how to get with a study group. I was better prepared. But the university, to me, didn't, wasn't any more welcoming. They weren't any more welcoming.
When you returned in 1970 through 1970 through 1974, where did you and your family live?
Oh, because now I'm a military dependent, so I lived out near it was Bergstrom Air Force Base, because we were Air Force dependents, and Bergstrom was I think it was a TAC or strategic Air Force base. So I moved my kids, my two kids, I have two children. We moved out there so we could be close to a support for me, which was Bergstrom. And that allowed me to be able to go on base, to be able to use the facilities there, because as a military dependent, my ex-husband and children's father, he retired from the Air Force. He was he was a good provider. He made sure that we were taken care of as far as monetarily. So I lived out by Bergstrom when it was actually a base, Bergstrom Air Force Base. Mm-hmm.
When you came back and earned your bachelor's, did you have to do an activity class like swimming?
Oh, you know what? I'm so glad you asked that, because I guess maybe I'm that kind of a person that I just hate for anything to be so difficult that I'm not going to be motivated to overcome it. I actually took swimming until I got to the advanced class, but not during that at UT, but just saying, hey, you can't tell me it used to be a stereotype, Black people can't swim. And so I was determined to say, I'm going to learn how to swim. And so I actually overcame that obstacle and took swimming, and swim today.
Oh, that's great. When you were, I guess before you came to UT, did you recall knowing about the Heman sweat versus painter case? Did you talk about it in Lubbock? Or?
No. And that's one thing about the African American community. The African American community, in my opinion, tried to protect us, protect their children from all of that ugliness that was around us. So, and now remember, I'm dealing with not my mother, but her mother. So I got another whole generation who's raising my sister and I. And so they taught us to value education. They made sure that they did the best they could, but they were poor. Everybody was poor. But they didn't know anything about Heman sweat, nor did my mother. I guess it depends on your level of education and what you're exposed to. But no, they did not. I only learned about Heman when I came back, one thing about us, we've all, even though we had a bad time at UT, I think I can speak for all of us that we love UT. We actually, it almost brings me to tears sometimes to think about how it was so difficult for us, but we still care about this university. Give me a moment. Yeah, it's something to really say, this is your school. This is actually your school, and how much we love it. And sometimes it hasn't shown that it loves us back. And so, I guess I don't know why we do this, but it's all we know. It's our university. And so it's getting better. And I think this is a good thing. And you'll see, and we feel that we're finite. The precursors are a finite group of people. When I say finite, that means that if we don't share our stories, if we don't tell our stories to someone, the younger people like you guys, people won't know what it was like. But we want people to know that in spite of it all, we did become accomplished. Most of us, we became accomplished. Now, some of us had no problem. I'm not speaking for all precursors. Some of the precursors just came. They were just smart like that, and whatever were the obstacles academically, it didn't matter because they just went on through, and they were just brilliant. But for the most of us, it wasn't that easy. And you see, some of us did get the degrees, and then some of us went to other universities and got the degrees. But I think the precursors were all determined. We were a determined group, and we're a close-knit group because we know what we all had to go through and still love this university.
Well, thank you. And I do want to say, I feel a lot of similarities in how I was raised in education. It wasn't an option. I was definitely going to college. Yes. It was so important for my family. And I want to thank you because of what you and the others did. Yes. I didn't have to worry about how hard it was going to be once I got there. And that's because of you.
Yes.
So thank you.
We wanted to make sure, and that's why we do what we do. We were the first ones. We went through it. And we didn't want you guys to go through it. And we wanted to do whatever we could to make sure you guys did not have to go through with what we went through. And so we support you. And we love you. And we just want to make sure that it's you enjoy the university and that it's a favorable experience. Because even though we had a lot of obstacles, we still love it. We wouldn't be here if we didn't. We wouldn't.
Yeah. I Thank you again.
Mhm.
All right, so we're going to keep talking.
Okay.
I'm going to keep
Yeah,
asking you
okay.
some questions.
Keep going.
And keep doing what you're doing.
Okay.
Whenever there's a story you
Yeah.
want to tell, please
Sure.
tell it.
Sure.
So you had said, your family was very protective,
Mhm.
particularly your grandparents.
Right.
And even, with that protection, were there any discussions about civil rights cases that you remember hearing when you were a kid?
Let me think. Civil rights cases, no, and not particularly, but I don't know why. My grandfather, I mean, I guess it also has a lot to do with how you're raised, genetics, and everything. I always had my grandfather. Now, this is my biological grandfather, my mother's father. Um, they told me to be, and my sister to be, conscious of our surroundings and, to protect us. That's one thing our parents, and I think I speak for a lot of African Americans, they want to protect their children from what was happening in our country. They want to protect us. So they didn't, I think you'll find that to be true. Many of our families wouldn't share anything, the Emmett Tills, because, I think that happened right while I was a kid. He was about my age. They didn't talk about any of that. They didn't talk about slavery. They saw, our folks saw, they were hopeful. I guess that's the way to look at African Americans, our ancestors. They were hopeful. They did not want to share our past with us. And they were hopeful that things would be better for us. So they didn't talk about it, but it was instilled in me, I just have to say everything was positive from my family. My grandfather, they all valued education, and it was like, I think I shared with you that all of my siblings, we all graduated from high school. Nobody had an option of not graduating. And we came from strong Black families. And today, my siblings, I'm the oldest of my siblings, and we still have those values. And we're sharing those values with our kids and our grandkids. And that's a positive thing.
That is a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you came to UT
Mm-hmm.
to get away from,
Mm-hmm.
to have new experiences, I'll say.
Well,
did you have some expectations of what campus would be like before you got here? Did you have thoughts about what UT would be like?
Yes, I just had. It was such I guess I was disillusioned because I just, my expectation was, okay, I'm going to this number one university in the South, and because this is where I live in Texas, and I just had expectations that it was just going to be, I'm in college, and it was just going to be so much fun, and that's how I came with that, and even though what was happening around me, I really didn't, I guess I'd consider myself not having a chip on my shoulder or anything. I was just trying to get an education. Basically, just trying to get an education. And I'm trying to remember people that I met, at 18. You just have to think in the mind of an 18-year-old, what you're thinking about. And not understanding a lot of things that's an obstacles, just trying to really make your parents proud. Yeah.
So you had mentioned one of your classes, you were around 400 students. Right?
Yeah,
Did you ever have an idea of what the professors' expectations were for you coming in?
Yeah. Now I remember one particular professor. I just remember he had red hair and a red beard, and I was a student. And in the classes, you were always the only Black person in your class.
Oh, okay.
You were the only Black person in your class in 1964 and 65. And you just didn't feel. I did not feel that didn't feel like I could go up there and talk to him. It wasn't anything. And the students around us who were white students, they weren't friendly. They were not friendly. We were just, and now remember, we're all 18, 17, 18 in class. So, they had not been exposed to black students either. They're coming from all white schools. So I just remember I didn't feel like that I had the support that I would have needed to have as a student, that I could go to him. And it just seemed like I remember he was teaching something about Africa, because I've always been Afrocentric. And so, but I just remember him not being helpful and to helping me with it. It was a negative kind of thing. Yeah, you were just the only black student in your class. And what I want to share, this is what I want to share too. When I say that, since then, and we integrated. Remember, that 64 Act integrated, opened up integration. So when that happened, everything that had been all black became integrated. And so a lot of our black role model teachers, professors from our HBCUs, they had taught us to be proud. And I'm glad they did that, because that gave us what we needed to have, because we were really up against it, to teach us to be black and proud. And so we needed that. We were going to need that. And I just recall that when they integrated, they replaced all of our teachers in the New Deal schools that I had 2 black teachers in New Deal. And I think it was a 2-room school. And they replaced those with white teachers. And so the white teachers didn't teach us anything about our culture, to be proud or anything like that. And so I remember my friends would say to me, younger people, just like you guys, say, we never had a black teacher. We never had a black teacher all the way going through school. It was something to have a black teacher. And so I'm like, yeah, but it was supposed, the civil rights was 64 was supposed to integrate it, but it didn't open it up, where I felt that it was really something for the younger people to tell me they went all the way through from 1st grade to 12th grade. And many of them most of them didn't have a black teacher. And so I'm like, okay, because I went to college, there certainly weren't any black professors. And so it was a different time. The whole time it was a different time. Mm-hmm.
So we've talked a little bit about what it was like in class,
mm-hmm.
and being
mm-hmm.
often the only black person.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like moving around campus?
mm-hmm.
Getting from class
oh, yeah.
1 to class
mm-hmm.
2.
Yeah. Oh, that was. And I guess it was monumental for somebody 18 years old on the University of Texas's campus, trying to get all the way across to the side of the campus for a class, and not really seeing a lot of people look like you. And so it was you had to, like I said, with the example of the swimming class, you had to try to get your hair together and get over there for the next class. It was very hard. It was very difficult, because for me, I had a little bit of reprieve with my cousin. She was also a freshman, and so sometimes I would see her on campus, and we would communicate. So I would see, but most of the African Americans were far and in between. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned your cousin who was
mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about what your community of friends was like?
Okay. One of our precursors he's here. He was I remember him, and I saw him today. He was helping I think he told us he was a student here too. He was out there on the campus, on the mall, taking up monies, asking for monies to help Jesse Jackson's Operation Push, Feed the Children campaign. I remember that. And I remember him. He would always be right out on the mall there. And I remember, I said that to him one time. I said, "Don't you remember?" And he kind of laughed about it because he was like, "Yeah, I had to, make sure you guys put some money in the bucket." But it was pleasant just to see him because he was one of us. Mm-hmm.
For that, I'd say the first year particularly, were there things that you were able to do for entertainment?
For entertainment, well, I think my situation was so different from most of the precursors because they were either in the dorm maybe, or they lived in Austin, but because I had really no place. My place was in Lubbock, and I'm living in Bastrop until I took the first. I think I shared that the first semester I was just not knowing what to expect, and so I tried to study, and I was not getting any good grades. So the first semester got a whole bunch of really bad grades, and I couldn't find. I was so hurting. And then at the end of the first semester, I was told that that I was on scholastic probation. And so that meant, okay, you got this. Is this your first time coming in here? And you're already on scholastic the first semester. And then if you don't pull them up the second semester, it's forced withdrawal. And so I was like, okay, okay. So I don't even know who to go to with that. But I just tried my best. Of course, I couldn't make those grades, get those grades up. So I had to leave the university. And that's what I did. And my story is all around, what happened there. And me not really knowing what was happening to me. Because you're coming out of Jim Crow. You're really coming out of where you had, one thing I do remember in Lubbock, that in high school, they built the brand new high school for us to keep us from integrating with the schools in Lubbock. But they also gave us textbooks that had been used by the white students. I wonder if the younger people really knew what we all had to go through. So the big thing in Lubbock at Dunbar was getting a book that didn't have writing on the edges and everything because it had been handed down from the white school. So you're just really not prepared for institutionalize what you were up against in that time.
You mentioned that the Black Student Union was an important part of your experience.
Yes.
Were there any other spaces at UT Austin that you felt comfortable and welcomed?
No, because now some of the other precursors might be able to relate to this and corroborate it. We had a Black Studies department, Black Studies, and we had I remember that one Black professor, Dr. Geneva Gay, and she's around. I think she's in Oregon, Dr. Geneva Gay. She was a PhD, and all of us wanted to take her class because she was a beautiful Black woman. And I just remember going into the student union during the 2 semesters that I was here, and I remember the beads, and we had it all set up with, it was drums. it was cute, but we went in there and we just had, this is our space. The university said this could be our space, the Black Student Union. And I don't remember some of the people. I kind of remember one guy went on to be a vice provost at Purdue. I remember him. And that was one of the students. I won't say his name because I do know his name. I won't say it. And then I remember Dr. Gay, who was a professor at it was called the Black Studies Department then. And I just remember that today when I heard one of the professors said something about the Black Student Union, no, the Black Studies Department. That's what it's, and I was so happy to hear that I said, I'm glad that it's come back to Black Studies because it started out as being Black Studies, but it has gone through many generations of changes. But it's still to all of us that were here coming in. It was the Black Studies Department. You can call it whatever you want to call it. But it started out for us as Black Studies Department. But it was favorable. That was a favorable experience.
I certainly don't want to dwell on the negative. You have so many good stories. I'm wondering, because UT is such a big campus, were there spaces that seemed even more unwelcoming than others?
Okay. Well, let's see. I almost want to say, well, maybe it's because when you're 18 years old, you just kind of, I mean, I don't remember anything being really, well, there was, to tell you, I think I remembered the Dolby Center. There was a Dolby Center back then that they showed movies, and I didn't even try to go and get in there, but from what I understand from some of the other precursors, the Dolby Center, there was a movie theater there, and I never did try to get into that, but I think there were demonstrations. But the fun part that I remember was, oh gosh, every time I think about the whole time I went to the University of Texas, I got $3,000. We had no money. We were poor, and we had no money, and so I was able to get a $3,000 loan. And that just sticks in my head to say, how can you get a college education? I'm still trying to figure out how I got my education starting out with $3,000, but I got my degree. Of course, a lot of it had to do with the fact that when I became older, I was able to finance my own education. But I just remember this is something that my cousin and I, we're the same age. We came at the same time. She was raised and is from Austin, went to L.C. Anderson, and we're cousins, blood cousins, bloodline. And so I just remember her when she was struggling, trying to get money. I was trying to get money from the university, and finally got my loan approved. And I said, "Oh, I'm not going to call her name, but I told her, I said, "Oh, I got my loan approved. They gave me my check." And I think it was something like maybe $1,500 first. And I just remember us going across the street to the drag and going shopping and buying some hot pants. It's, that was a favorable thing for us. Just say, hey, I got some money, so I got some money. We're going to go shopping. And so we went over because they had shops along the drag, and we went over and bought some hot pants.
I love that story.
When I look back on it, I'm like, and she laughs about it. I said, do you remember? She said, yeah, I remember. You bought some suede ones, and I bought some other kinds. That's 18-year-olds. But it's just ironic that I was able to get an education. That's all the money the university gave me. And it was a loan.
So you've told us so much about your experience. When you're reflecting on your life, how did coming to UT and spending time on campus, how did that affect you?
Well, I learned, now this is something I came to realize later. By going to the University of Texas and my parents wanting me to go to the University of Texas, and I wanted to go to the University of Texas, it opened so many doors when I got my degree. I was just amazed that it opened so many doors. After I graduated with my bachelor's, of course, got my commission. I got my commission because it was like, it's almost like a ticket when you go to UT and graduate and get a degree from the University of Texas. It speaks, even today, it still means something. And when I look at the young people behind me and they matriculated here and they get their degree, I know it really makes me proud, because I said, now that is going to carry some weight. For those of us that came before you, we had a difficult time, but it did open doors for us. It opened doors for me, and I was able to get my commission and opened the door into the military, and it has been positive ever since.
Can you explain more about a commission? I'm not sure
Yeah.
what that is.
Okay. Now, during the time, this country. Because one thing I love about my degree is I just love history. The whole country at that time was evolving to where it was mostly male dominated, and women had their roles. All of us women, whatever your race was, you were in your female role. So of course when I got my commission, I was commissioned in the Women's Army Corps in 1975, because this country hadn't even gotten up to where white women it could go to come in the military, at equal with men. We all were segregated. The women, all of us women, had to be in our own little corps. But I came in, my recruiter was like, he could see the writing on the wall. He said, the times are changing. So women now, you can come in with a commission. Now, I'm looking at opportunities. I'm trying to look at opportunities. All women were. And so he was like, well, because you graduated from the University of Texas, you have a degree. I can get you a direct commission, which meant that you didn't have to go to the service schools, the West Points, the naval academies, because they weren't taking women either. So, but this country was changing, and it's still changing, and it's all for the good. So they gave me a commission, as we all went. Some of us that had degrees. The only way you could get a commission was you had to have, gotten a degree, because you couldn't go to the service academies. So I was given a direct commission. Now that word was direct, which meant that, okay, no women, black, white, or otherwise, could come into the military unless they were a nurse or a doctor. You had to, because the country was not letting women in unless you had, so we can direct commission you to catch up with the men at West Point or at the Naval Academy. All women. We can direct commission all of you. And they did. They direct commissioned me, skipped over first lieutenant. Now, everybody in the military, this was military man, and Colonel Hollins is a colonel too. You met him, right? You had to start out as a second lieutenant. Everybody started out as a second lieutenant. But if you were a nurse or a doctor, you could apply and you could jump over that. So they direct commissioned me to first lieutenant. I'd never been a second lieutenant. And they sent me, and I went in, and I went into the Women's Army Corps for women only, no men. And so that was in 1975. But after I got in, all of us women were integrated into, I tell people, I use the term for real Army. Well, I don't want to take away from the Women's Army Corps, because we love the Women's Army Corps. But it was just all women by law. And, we weren't in Vietnam unless we were a nurse or somebody helping with the war. But I do have in my packet of documents where this country did give us credit for being a Vietnam era military person. So I am considered a Vietnam era military person, because I went in 1975 and the war was over in 75. So, but I get a chance to have that designation, and I got a chance to come in with my degree and be direct commissioned to first lieutenant, which gave me a running start, and it was really instrumental in me being able to rise up through the ranks and retire as a colonel, a lieutenant colonel.
Thank you for explaining that. That's fantastic. I want to make sure that we talk about your diploma.
Oh.
So can you talk a little bit about what you have from UT?
Yes, I have it. I have the, as a matter of fact, I have it here, and I want to show, this is what I have from UT. I haven't been able to try to get to the bottom of this. This has been 58 years. And I got this This is something I really want this to be shown because it makes no sense to me. And I just given up on trying to make sense out of it. Because this is what the University of Texas gave me to this day. I don't have a diploma. When you get a degree, you get a diploma. This is my diploma. It's embarrassing and it's shameful to me, but this is what the university, and it is has a seal on the back. And I at my house I have this framed as my diploma. That's another thing that almost makes me cry. This is what I never thought that a university could withhold your diploma when they award you the degree. How could they withhold your diploma? That's it. And so I have tried to get to the bottom of it, and I've gotten several stories from the university's registration office about it. And they don't know because now when you're talking about 58 years ago, they have no records. They start losing some records. And the records that are lost are, in our case, it's a lot of African American records. And so I've tried to say, well, do you have all of us that were enrolled? I went to the registrar's office and tried to say, well, do you have a list of all of the people that were enrolled? Well, something happened and some records got burned up and they don't know, but at least you can see that they had, I'm glad I got this. So I couldn't get a list. I said, well, do you have a record of all the people that were attending the university? No, well, that department, we moved the records over here, this and that. So then I tried to find out. I said, well, what about when I was here, the only money that the university gave me was, first they said it was a loan. And so, like I told you, it was only got $3,000, but it was a government insured loan through the guaranteed. So I said, well, let me check, because now remember, I'm overseas. And when you're overseas in the military, they give you deferments, all kinds of stuff for your loan. So when I went back to the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education, they said, Miss Williams, you don't owe the government anything. You don't. And if you had a loan, your loan would have been paid off, guaranteed. It was paid off by the government. So then they said, but we don't know about Texas. That's what they told me. I said, we don't know what Texas. So then I tried to ask. I said, well, I don't owe anything. Why don't I have? Can I get my diploma? Well, let's see. It looks like that was paid off, but the interest was 100 maybe 115. You owe the interest on it. And ladies and gentlemen, I could have a diploma right to this day if I believed that, and if I was willing to pay that. That's just the stubbornness in me that says wrong. It was wrong. So now you're saying, well, maybe some interest. It could have been some interest. We don't remember. 58 years ago, we just don't remember. Nobody has any record, but it looks like there was it was paid off, but Texas still you owe Texas some interest on it. And I said, well, how much is it? Well, this looks like it's $100 and some odd. And I just refused to pay it. So I don't have a diploma. Because I believe that they know they're wrong. But it's and this is the part that bothers me so much about that stuff can be put in records, and it's so hard to go back after so much time has passed and try to get people to say, well, prove this. Do you have the record? No, but you still don't have a diploma. And I'm saying, okay, well, I'm not going. I know I can pay it. I believe I have $100 and some to pay, but it was too much done to us, and this is just the last straw.
Yeah, I definitely understand, and thank you. I know that was the hardest story, so I appreciate you sharing that. Miss Doris, is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you?
No, I think for us, the only comment I would make now is it has been a life experience. It started out, and most of us went on with our lives. And but when we talk about starting the beginning, it's so much life was lived in between us starting here and where we are today. And many of us are almost at the end. We're really almost at the end. And we just appreciate this opportunity so much to get these stories in. And that's pretty much, it was a whole life. This is a whole life when you talk about the precursors at the University of Texas.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Just check with my other folks. Okay. Just wonderful. Your stories are fantastic. Thank you so much. I just feel very honored to be able to spend this time with you today.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this.